Welcome to MultiPrime Briefings. I'm Matthew, and joining me as always is Ruth. And Ruth, I'll say upfront, this week the headline basically walked in and introduced itself.
1.9%.
1.9% GDP growth, year-on-year, Q2 2026, and a negative 0.2 on the quarterly, seasonally adjusted basis. Thailand is technically in contraction on a quarter-over-quarter red. That is a bad number.
It is a bad number. But I want to push immediately on whether this is the structural crisis the Atlantic Council is calling it, or whether it's a rough quarter with identifiable culprits, energy prices spiking, stimulus disbursements running late, that looks different in Q3.
That's the right challenge, and here's why I land firmly on the structural side. The Atlantic Council piece flags two numbers that don't disappear between quarters: household debt sitting at close to 90% of GDP, and an aging population compressing the labor supply. Those are not things a one-time stimulus package resolves. Energy prices can normalize, yes, but the underlying exposure is that Thailand's growth model is built on export manufacturing at a price point that Vietnam and Indonesia are now undercutting systematically. That's not a cyclical headwind.
Okay, but...
Go ahead.
Reinvent your growth model is something think tanks say every 5 years regardless of what the data actually shows. Thailand has been told to move up the value chain since about 2005. The speech is so familiar, it barely registers anymore.
Fair. The pivot to high-value manufacturing presentation is genuinely the most recycled deck in Southeast Asian economic policy. I've seen versions of it from 3 different administrations.
So what is actually different this time?
3 things, I think, and they're happening simultaneously in a way that's new. First, the tariff environment. U.S. tariff pressure on manufactured goods from ASEAN is no longer a threat on the horizon, it's live policy. And it's actively compressing margins in sectors Thailand genuinely depends on: automotive parts, electronics assembly, processed rubber. Second, the digital economy frameworks are crystallizing right now. DEFA, which we'll get to in the industry section, is locking in regional standards for AI governance and cross-border data flows. Firms that are building compliance infrastructure today will shape those norms. Firms that aren't will comply with someone else's rulebook in 18 months. And third, the AI infrastructure build-out globally is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to attract a different class of foreign direct investment. But it has a lead time measured in years, not quarters. It requires power grid investment, data center capacity, and a regulatory posture Thailand has not fully defined.
Okay, I'll grant you the tariff point. That one is clearly structural. But on AI FDI, isn't Thailand third in a queue where Singapore has a decade head start? And Malaysia is moving very aggressively on data centers right now?
Maybe third, but third in a genuinely growing market is not a bad position if you execute. And here's the nuance the BCG data center report adds: the constraint on AI infrastructure globally right now is not compute, it's power grid capacity and energization timelines. BCG documents delays of multiple years for new data center energization in mature markets. Thailand has geography, some existing industrial power infrastructure, and the possibility of using a renewable energy build-out as a dual-purpose play, decarbonize the grid and attract hyperscaler investment at the same time. The question is whether government moves at the speed the market requires, which historically has not been a Thai institutional strength.
That's a very polite way to put it.
I try.
So who actually wins and loses from this GDP print? Concretely, for the executives listening.
Losers first. Export manufacturers in mid-tier segments who have been hoping tariff pressure was temporary and haven't diversified either their customer base or product mix. Also Thai households, real income is being squeezed and there is very limited policy room to ease that pressure quickly, because the BOT can't cut rates aggressively with consumer debt-to-income ratios this high without risking a credit deterioration cycle. Winners or potential winners: firms with a credible digital services proposition, because DEFA creates a regional market that rewards early compliance. Healthcare and logistics players who can capture the telepharmacy channel before it consolidates. And, I'll be transparent here, advisory and training firms who are going to be very busy helping large Thai conglomerates figure out what their strategy looks like when the old model is breaking down.
A moment of strategic self-interest, acknowledged on air. I respect it.
Transparency is a virtue.
What's the one metric you'd give a CFO to track? Not GDP? Something more leading.
Board of Investment approval data, specifically in non-manufacturing sectors. If you start seeing meaningful approvals in digital infrastructure, healthcare technology, and green energy, not pipeline announcements, actual approved projects, that's evidence the pivot is real and capital is following rhetoric. If it's still 40% automotive and electronics assembly, the structural story is not changing regardless of what the policy speeches say.
Good. Let's do macro.
The Fed. July FOMC minutes landed this week, and the summary is, no hurry. The committee is navigating the tension between residual inflation that hasn't fully cleared and labor market signals that are softening at the margin. For Thai corporates carrying USD-denominated debt, the practical read is that dollar strength persists for now, rate relief, and therefore THB relief from a weaker dollar, is a late 2026 or 2027 story at the earliest.
And the ECB Consumer Expectations Survey points the same direction from the demand side. European households are pulling back on spending and trimming their growth outlook. That's not just sentiment. It's a forward demand signal for ASEAN exporters.
Right. European consumer demand is a real export channel for ASEAN, processed food, automotive components, apparel. If European households are contracting their spending just as Thailand is losing price competitiveness to Vietnam, that's a double compression, losing market share while the total market shrinks. The timing could not be worse.
So, the Bank of Thailand September meeting, do they cut?
I think the pressure is clearly building. Growth is stalling, external demand is softening, and the government needs some monetary support for its fiscal stimulus to have traction. But the household debt constraint is genuinely binding. Cutting rates when 90% of GDP is consumer debt risks accelerating a credit deterioration if households use cheaper debt to roll bad positions rather than consume or invest productively. My read is a cautious 25 basis point cut, maximum, with very loud data dependent signaling to keep expectations anchored.
Conservative but probably right. On to industry.
DEFA first, because I think it's being significantly undersold as a story. 11 ASEAN nations, negotiations concluded, November signing. This is real and it matters.
What I want to push on is the framing. People hear trade agreement and think tariffs, but this is primarily a standards agreement, right?
Exactly. The Digital Economy Framework Agreement is fundamentally about who sets the norms for AI governance, cross-border data flows, and e-commerce interoperability across a $2 trillion digital market. The firms and governments that were active in the negotiating process, or that have been building compliance infrastructure in anticipation, are in a completely different position from those who will read the news in November and ask their legal teams what it means for them.
Standards are where the actual power lives, and somehow this is always the story that gets less coverage than the headline signing ceremony.
Every single time. Thailand specific, the data localization provisions matter enormously for any Thai firm running cross-border digital services. If DEFA harmonizes data flow rules in a way that is more permissive than Thailand's current PDPA framework, that's an opportunity to expand. If DEFA is more restrictive in some dimensions, that's a compliance upgrade cost you need to budget for now, not later. We don't know yet precisely how the final provisions land, which is exactly why legal and compliance teams should be reading the technical annexes right now.
Telepharmacy. This one is very concrete and very immediate.
Baker McKenzie confirmed that Thailand's telepharmacy regulatory framework is now in force. Not a pilot, not a sandbox, live compliance obligations for digital health platforms, delivery providers, anyone in the prescription or dispensing chain digitally. The channel is open. Consumer behavior in digital health tends to be sticky once formed, so the question is simply who captures the early adopter base. First-mover pharmacy networks and logistics operators with healthcare-compliant cold chain are the immediate beneficiaries. If you're in that space and you're treating this as a future problem, you're already behind.
And the Bain Gaming Report? You've argued this is a proxy story for much more than gaming.
Right. The headline finding is that player preferences have fragmented so completely that the concept of an average gamer is functionally gone, and studios building for an undifferentiated middle audience are being destroyed economically. High production costs, diffuse marketing, spend, no loyalty, no defensible position. But substitute the word gamer with consumer in financial services, retail, media, healthcare, the dynamic is identical. The average customer has disaggregated. Consumer businesses still running broad demographic segmentation strategies are behind the curve on this, and the gap compounds every year.
Capability Corner. And this week it really is one big theme.
Agentic AI, and the McKinsey paper on this is specific enough to be worth engaging with seriously rather than just filing under consulting thinks AI is important. The core argument is, the performance gap between AI winners and AI laggards is not about which tools you've deployed. It's about whether you have redesigned the entire product development or operational system around AI, versus dropped a copilot into an existing workflow and called it transformation.
Which most large organizations have done. The latter.
Overwhelmingly the latter. And the mechanism matters. An AI agent operating inside a legacy workflow hits the same bottlenecks, approval gates, and handoff friction as human workers did. You don't get compounding efficiency unless you redesign around what AI actually does differently. Parallel processing, continuous deployment, automated testing and validation loops. That requires genuine organizational surgery, not a tool procurement decision.
Here is my pushback. McKinsey describes the destination correctly. They don't describe how to get there for a large incumbent with entrenched teams, legacy systems, and middle managers, whose entire value proposition is coordinating across a broken process. The organizational politics of workflow redesign are the hard part. The paper basically skips that entirely.
That is a real and fair gap in the paper. What I'd add is the BCG grid piece connects here in a way that most corporate AI strategies are missing entirely. The infrastructure constraint on agentic AI at serious scale is power. BCG documents energization delays of multiple years for new data center capacity in mature markets. In Southeast Asia, with less developed grid infrastructure and higher baseline reliability risk, that constraint is potentially more acute. If you are a Thai enterprise planning to run serious AI workloads at scale in 2 years, the power infrastructure question is not a facilities management problem. It is a strategic planning problem that belongs in a board-level conversation today.
Years. That number should make boards genuinely uncomfortable.
Multiple years, and AI compute demand is roughly doubling every 18 months. The math on that gap is not comfortable.
From the firms.
2 McKinsey pieces worth a focused look and some honest pushback. The agentic product development paper we've engaged with throughout, directionally correct on the system redesign thesis, thin on the organizational change management that makes it actually happen in a real institution with real politics. The AI trust piece featuring Invesso's CEO Andrew Schlossberg makes a genuinely important point. Trust in AI, once visibly lost through a public failure or a misstep that reaches customers, is extremely hard to recover. Schlossberg argues AI needs to be core to firm strategy, not a side initiative. That argument is right.
The argument is right. The execution of the article is CEO brand positioning. If I'm a CISO or head of AI at a Thai bank trying to figure out what maintaining AI trust actually means operationally, what failure modes to guard against, what governance structures have proven effective, how to detect early warning signals before something becomes a public incident, that piece gives me principles and one anecdote. That is not enough.
Agreed completely. What the piece should have done, and what would make it genuinely useful, is provide a taxonomy of AI trust failures. What categories of failure erode trust fastest, whether it's accuracy failures, transparency failures, or demographic bias failures that hit differently in different markets. The recovery playbook empirically. How you instrument your AI systems to catch drift before it becomes a headline. The instinct Schlossberg is expressing is correct. The operational specificity is not there.
BCG's data center report is the opposite case. Quite specific, real data behind it, sourced timeline numbers. If you're in infrastructure, energy, or technology leadership, that's worth the read. Bain's gaming report is also genuinely well-researched, though I'd push back on one thing. The deep personalization prescription is correct, but seriously undercosted. The capital required to actually build personalization at the level Bain describes, data infrastructure, content creation pipelines, real-time delivery systems, is substantial. Mid-tier studios, or mid-tier consumer businesses in ASEAN for that matter, trying to survive the transition don't have unlimited balance sheets.
The "this is what you must do without here is what it costs and whether your business model can fund it" gap. It's a classic consulting report structure.
Ha, you live in that world, you'd know.
I know the format very well from both sides of the table.
Let's close out.
3 things to watch heading into the coming weeks. First, Bank of Thailand September meeting language, not just the rate decision itself, but the forward guidance. If the bot shifts its characterization of the growth trajectory meaningfully, that signals how much runway the policy pivot has and whether you should be revising your credit cost assumptions. Second, DEFA implementation specifics. The November signing is symbolic and important, but the real game starts in the technical working groups that draft the implementation standards after signing. Watch which countries are chairing those committees. That is where the actual rules get written, and early participation shapes what everyone else has to comply with. Third, ask honestly about your own organization's AI spend. The McKinsey framing is a useful diagnostic. Are we redesigning the system, or are we bolting expensive tools onto a legacy process and calling it transformation? The answer to that question probably matters more to your competitive position in 3 years than most of the strategic planning exercises you are currently running.
And I want to end on something slightly uncomfortable. The manufacturing era that built Thailand's middle class over the last 30 years is not coming back at the same scale. That is not pessimism. It is a structural assessment based on demographics, debt levels, and competitive dynamics that are not reversing. The question for Thai executives is not whether the transition is coming. It is whether the capital allocation, talent development, and institutional decisions you are making right now are oriented toward what comes next, or toward defending what worked last decade. Those are genuinely different bets, and the time to make that choice clearly is now, not after another 2 quarters of data confirms the trend.
Well said. That's the week. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Ruth. Thanks for listening to MultiPrime Briefings. See you next week.